I wake up to the news that yet another black person has been killed. Philando Castile, a 32-year-old man, was fatally shot by a police officer in Falcon Heights, Minnesota after being pulled over. I feel sick. I arrive at the conference in the morning and present my paper on white supremacy to a small crowd. At the end of my talk, a white male professor, whose work I have admired, raises his hand and asks, "Aren't you making too much of race? Does it even really matter in this day and age?" Capitalism is racist, and the educational institutions that reproduce its ideology require rigorous critique, material challenge, and coordinated collective action to build a movement for anti-racist scholar activism. From its inception until today, capitalism in all its forms, colonial, slave, mercantile, financial, market, information, has used racist logic to demarcate superior white humanity from deficient black non-humans, distributing wealth along a racialized scale of human value. In business schools, the racist foundations of capitalism have been largely ignored, while their expansion in terms of student numbers, fees, faculty, and international campuses has led scholars to question the ethics of chiefly serving white groups. In the present mire of climate emergency, hardening national borders, and intensifying racial violence, this essay is an urgent call for scholars of color to collectively act up to radically challenge the white supremacist nature of business schools, even as it plays out differently in local contexts. Addressing racialized forms of exclusion requires that the white academy stops forgetting and instead engages with its past and, most importantly, its present continuities with violence. Engaging with its past requires white academia to recognize how the university continues to serve as an arm of the state, perpetuating and hardening borders that facilitate access, circulation, and value of white knowledge at the expense of non-white people and our knowledge. Business schools uphold white supremacy by perpetuating a racist logic that protects the idea of white nations at the cost of black and brown lives. Such amnesia manifests in our material working conditions through marginalization, targeted monitoring, harassment, and racialized gendered inequalities in hiring, pay, and promotion of global majority staff and students. Our value to the institution, and therefore our right to remain in academia, is diminished by accounting techniques designed and administered by white groups in ways that favor them. Any pathways to seek material remediation for these conditions are grossly mitigated by university governance structures that fail to recognize such exclusions as racist. In the business school specifically, knowledge production has erased race from business scholarship, resulting in the continued omission of the roles of Indigenous genocide, extractive settler colonialism, and black chattel slavery in contemporary capital accumulation and wealth disparity. We exist in societies that obscure the facts of white violence. People of color are trying to survive in educational environments that treat our knowledge as not worth knowing. Our curricula almost exclusively teach the opinions of white American and European men, and we learn to mimic their voices, the historical price of recognition as fully human, a perverse echo of the charming natives who adopt the master's ways. When we migrate, we learn to become fluent in the language of the powerful to demonstrate our ability to speak. The near wholesale omission of our knowledge from business management curricula reinforces to our students of color that they and their critique of the field have no real place in the business school. It also reproduces racist dichotomies between the supposedly knowing, well-governed North and the ignorant, corrupt South. Navigating the borderlands of scholar activism. Following Gloria Anzaldua's theorizing of the borderlands, we recognize our own positionalities between multiple, sometimes conflicting worlds as migrants, children of migrants, non-black women of color, scholars, and activists. In our institutions, where it is always risky to speak out against white supremacy, we hold roles of varying precarity. We, therefore, continuously negotiate our locations within whiteness and the ways that our knowledge production and working conditions are shaped by it. Existing and struggling in these in-between and shifting spaces are how we develop knowledge about the fault lines of power. We found our starting point in the cracks and fissures of white supremacy by working in activist spaces in the margins of universities. If these spaces did not exist, we built them through a deep involvement with anti-racist philosophy and by working with student communities of color. We asked ourselves, what do we want to see? How do we want to feel? These questions are premised on a desire to relate differently to each other as we work with the politics of refusal, in which we reject the preordained academic narrative of competition, individualistic careerism, and the automaton-like compulsion to produce outputs at any cost. We continually challenge this careerist narrative through the process of collectivizing and becoming accountable to each other in ways that are inconceivable to white academia.
Within the white academy, our bodies are rendered vulnerable and contested. As space invaders, our bodies come into conflict with its structures in ways that take a toll on our mental and physical health. The harm on our bodies is felt in the nauseating anxiety as we gather up the courage to tell our manager that they are exploiting colleagues of colour in precarious contracts, the hours of overtime put in to develop repeated applications for promotion with little hope of them being accepted, and the reading and rereading of our email to the dean asking why yet another candidate of colour was passed over for recruitment. The pain is in the crossed arms and frowns of a conference audience and the influential professor who whispers "troublemaker" to those around him, and in the venomous review we receive from an anonymous peer whose mind snaps shut at our first use of the phrase racism. It is in the shuns we receive from colleagues who stop inviting us out for lunch when we have spoken up for students of colour too often at department meetings. In the silence when it is always only our voices speaking out, and in the emotional labour of absorbing the anger and deflections of defensiveness or soothing tears of awakening. Yet we return to put our bodies on the line with the intention of resisting white structures, while knowing that the potential for co-optation or retaliation against us is possible. Experiences of safety and wholeness at work are found in spaces of our own making and tentatively introduced into environments where their welcome is uncertain.
Becoming good elders. With the guidance of our own anti-racist elders who offer advice both directly and through their writing, we work towards becoming good elders ourselves. We see the students of colour in our discipline, who in the United Kingdom make up the highest proportion only after medicine and law, struggle as their experiences are erased or denied. We try to bring them up with us into the academic pipeline and to lend our armour to them when they inevitably face the racist forces of the business school. The good elder helps to make racism thinkable and speakable on campus, empowers our students with intellectual frameworks to understand it, to advocate for students of colour, to hear them and to validate their experiences as real. Our students seek and generate this knowledge outside of the academy in other communities, including social media. Good elders need to engage with these spaces and to value them as part of a wider activist network that can work against capitalist economies. Being good elders also requires that we become custodians of our communities in ways that exercise ongoing reflexive accountability with one another. Within our own communities of colour, anti-blackness and anti-indigeneity means non-black and non-Indigenous people of colour gain from white structures. This privilege needs to be considered, rejected, and or leveraged as necessary in solidarity with Black and Indigenous people. We need to work to challenge and change discourses that serve to fix people of colour so that we may shape the depth and direction of our own narratives. Being a good elder is to fight together for the very possibility of transformation, for creative spaces, new imaginaries and hope. It is to ensure the next generation of business scholars of colour will not merely survive, but live, learn and work in environments that sustain their knowledge and desire their truth.